Today we are going to be looking at the main apartheid laws that the National Party government introduced to enforce the system of apartheid. The first law we are going to be looking at today is the Population Registration Act. This act divided the whole population into 4 race groups: black, coloured, white and Indian. People were given identity cards that stated the race group that they belonged to. The second act we are going to look at is the Mixed Marriages Act and the Immorality Act. These acts made marriages and relationships between white people and people of other races illegal. Act number 3 is the Group Areas Act. This act identified separate areas of land for each race group. Those living in areas allocated to another race group were forced to leave. Act number 4 is the Separate Amenities Act. This act forced people to use separate buses, trains, parks, benches, hotels, cinemas, hospitals, ambulances, libraries, restaurants, beaches, and toilets. Sport was strictly segregated. No interracial competitions were allowed, and no mixed-race sporting teams could represent South Africa at an international level. No mixed-race teams from other countries could tour to South Africa either. The fifth act we are going to look at is the Bantu Education Act. Under the Bantu Education Act, the government took over control of the education of black children. They were taught to be obedient and not to think critically. Far less money was spent on black schools than on schools for other races. The second last act we're going to look at today is the Separate Representation of Voters Act. And this act took the vote away from coloured voters in the Cape. After this, only white people had political rights in South Africa. The last act we're going to look at today is called the Homeland System. This system was based on the idea that black people belonged to separate national groups and that each group should have its own homeland. According to the government, every black person was a citizen of his or her homeland and therefore was not a South African. 10 separate homelands were set up in the reserves. They had no major industries or resources, and they could therefore not be economically strong. The South African government could overrule any decisions made by these homeland governments. As part of the homeland system, the government forced 3.5 million people to move into the overcrowded and very poor homelands. This policy of moving people was known as the forced removals, and we will be looking at this more in depth in our case studies next week.